All right, everyone. So you are in the right place if you are here for our engineering and manufacturing industry panel. We have three wonderful professionals here with us. This panel is hosted by the career education counselors at GCC with support from our career services team and our GCC Foundation. So thank you everyone who made this event possible. My name is Shelby. I'm one of the career education counselors. Brianna and Antonio are also here to help us out from the CE team today. If you need anything, you can always chat us during this session, but we're going to do a facilitated Q&A, and then you'll get to ask your own questions in the second half. So without further ado, I'm going to start by introducing our panelists by reading their biographies, so you know who's here with us today. So I will start with Scott Vanderzil. And while Scott's last 15 plus years have primarily focused on the quality management arena, his roots, extensive background, and love for the manufacturing and machining processes have kept him very close to the manufacturing and production operations. Having lived in the government, large business, and small business environments throughout his career, he has developed an appreciation for the benefits of each of them. And for each of these benefits, there are challenges of a similar magnitude. Developing methods to overcome these challenges and transition them into organizational advantages is an area that intrigues Scott most. Founding and developing Alliance Space Systems is second only to Scott's family for the things he's most proud of. Nurturing and growing both of them has been extremely rewarding. He's fortunate now to be in a place in his life where he can be flexible. He finds the privilege of mentoring as a rewarding and learning experience and cherishes each of those opportunities, including today. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Scott. And I'll let you introduce yourself when I ask the first question, but I'm just going to rapid fire go on to Shaquille Din's introduction. So Shaquille is currently head of engineering validation at Takeda's Los Angeles manufacturing site, where he's responsible for all facility, utility, equipment, computerized systems, and cleaning validations. His over 25 years of industry experience in a variety of manufacturing industries, but predominantly in the biopharmaceutical area. He obtained a master's in engineering degree in chemical engineering from Loughborough University in England, and he obtained an MBA from Pepperdine University. Shaquille is also Six Sigma Green Belt certified. Last but not least, we have Yogida Shah, who is a flight systems engineer at Jet Propulsion Lab. She's currently avionics domain lead for the Mars 2020 project. She has over 20 years of experience embedded engineering, real-time software/firmware development, digital signal processing, risk analysis and assessment for flight and ground software, and systems engineering. Prior to joining JPL, she was engineering manager and engineering specialist at Aerospace Corporation, where she has provided her embedded hardware and software expertise to a variety of customers and programs. She's provided software and systems lifecycle support to a number of DoD customer programs. She has a BS in electrical engineering from the Government Engineering College of Aurangabad, India, and an MS in electrical engineering from California State University, Northridge. So welcome, I forgot to welcome Shaquille and welcome Yogida. If I mispronounce any of your degrees or names, please correct me. But thank you again so much for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing and put you on Spotlight so you take up more space in the screen for everyone to see you. So let's give it a moment to do that. Thanks for your patience, y'all. All right, so if you are on speaker view, you should see spotlighted our three panelists. And so we are going to jump right into the facilitated portion because that gives you a chance to introduce yourself. So I'm going to call on you so you know who to speak first, and you're going to introduce yourself and also share your education and career journey. What made you decide to pursue the career you currently have? And what road bumps did you overcome along the way? So let's get started with Shaquille.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. As Shelby introduced you all, I'm Shaquille Din. I work at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. It used to be called Baxter. Then it got change of ownerships, and then from Baxter to Baxalta to Shire. Now we're a Japanese-owned company, Takeda. Takeda has a long history. It's a 270-year-old company founded in Osaka, Japan. And just to share you some of my educational background and my career, I grew up in England. And I did my master's in chemical engineering from Loughborough University. Loughborough is a town, it's a university town about 120 miles north of London, which is the capital. I chose chemical engineering. I almost went into medicine because my dad, he was a doctor, but my dad really, he discouraged us from going into medicine, because in those days, it was, doctors had a tough life in England, you know, with the on-call, visiting, doing house calls, and it was tough. So he didn't really encourage us. And I started to look at engineering, and what attracted me to chemical engineering was its diverse nature, because there was a lot of different fields at that time. You could go into actually more fields now that chemical engineers can go into. And also the starting salaries were pretty high. And a young person, you know, coming out of college, earning good money. So that was one of the attractions as well. At university, I liked process control, automation. And, you know, as my esteemed colleagues, Yogida and Scott can attest to, control engineering, controls, it's the same, whether it's in electrical systems or manufacturing systems or what have you. There's similar techniques involved in where you do modeling and where you look at systems, disturbances, and try to get the system back in a state of control. So that's sort of really interested me. And so when I graduated, I worked for a company called Fisher Controls. This was in England. I worked on a lot of like automation projects, control system projects for the oil and gas, for the chemical industry, for British nuclear fuels. And so I spent about 5 years in England, and then I transferred to the Austin Emerson. Well, then it became bought out by another company called Emerson. So I transferred to their offices in Austin, and I worked in Austin for about 7 years, working again on pretty much oil and gas, a bit more pharma type industries, where you design a control system, you configure it, and then you go to the site to install that control system. And then in about around middle of 2002, I felt like I had enough of traveling. I wanted to work for an end user. And so that's when I joined Baxter. I joined Baxter in their automation department at the Thousand Oaks facility. That facility, it was a new facility, manufacturing suite actually, and they made, Advait was the drug that they made, and Advait is used for people with a hemophilia. Hemophilia is a blood disorder whereby the body is missing one of the factors. It's called a factor 8. What happens is, like, if you start to bleed, then your blood doesn't clot. And in order for the blood to clot, we make this, it's a genetically engineered drug. It's a factor 8, and then the patient injects it into their bodies to allow them to clot. So I was working there as an automation project manager, designing again a control system, installing it and commissioning it. Then I spent about 10 years at that site, gradually getting more and more responsibility. Eventually, you know, I was a head of that automation department in Thousand Oaks. Then in about 2011, I decided to, like, a little bit change careers, and I moved into the validation field. And I'll describe later on what the validation is. And I joined the Los Angeles Takeda manufacturing site as a computer system validation manager. And then gradually with more and more responsibility, I am where I am, you know, in my current position as the head of validation for this site. So I hope that answers the question, Shelby, without taking too much time for my other presenters.
Oh, that was perfect. I loved hearing about both your history and the company. I didn't know some of that. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And let's go ahead and pass it over to Yogida next.
Hey, so what, I think the question was like my education and my career journey. So what drove me into engineering was my curiosity. Growing up, I was always watching Star Trek and Apollo missions, and I was really inspired by how things work and what this really is. It was really fascinating. I have a little different one because my dad wanted to be engineer for whatever reason he could not. So I was like, I want to be an engineer. And with all these things that were just attracting me from the beginning, I decided to pursue this field. Math and science were always interesting to me. That's how I came into chose engineering as my major and did electrical engineering from India, came here on H1, and then I worked for a couple companies. Then I took a little break when I had kids, and then did my master's and joined Aerospace Corporation. Aerospace Corporation is federally funded research center for Air Force, and I worked there on wide variety of projects, hands-on projects from building the GPS receiver all the way to supporting various space programs, ground program, and the launch vehicle certification for SpaceX, where I was on the software panel. So aerospace gave me a breadth of, a spectrum, the systems engineering perspective that I developed there. And I have joined JPL since 5 years, where I am currently working as a flight systems engineer. I worked on Mars 2020, the rover that we just landed this year, which was an amazing project. The challenges that I would say was always for me was having that work-life balance in my life, because I had 2 kids when I started working at aerospace after finishing my master's. So when I was doing my master's, so having that balance to meet the work demands, produce a quality work, and at the same time, make sure that kids are doing good and we are taking care of the family correctly. That was the most challenging, and I would say the most rewarding for me. My both grades, my first son has graduated master's and my daughter is about to graduate. So I think that was the most rewarding one. So having that balance, which forced me to wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning to drive all the way to El Segundo to go to the job. But all these things, though were exhausting, but it was a rewarding experience. And the subsequent challenges that I faced in my career, they helped me to deal with it because it improved my time management skill, organization skills, and getting things done on like time and having things in right order, and prepared me for my leadership role. So I would say that every challenge that came across helped me to grow and develop in a different form. So every challenge just became a reward for me. Just by overcoming it was just fun. So this is how I came into engineering, and this is where I am today. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think so many of our students, some of them are parents or have family responsibilities. So that work-life balance, even as a student, they're learning it now and they'll be learning for the rest of their careers probably. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And last but not least for this first question, how about you, Scott?
Well, I took a little bit different path, and certainly not nearly as long as either Shaquille or Yogita. I actually grew up in La Crescenta. So, which is part of Glendale. It's just, a few miles away from Glendale College. and my dad had a machine shop twice, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So we certainly struggled. And for me, I was going to be a fireman. That was kind of my thing. And circumstances happened, and that wasn't possible. So I was working for the gas company, trying to figure out what I was going to do, about to get married, and was in a pretty bad motorcycle accident. Had a compounded fib fracture. And anyway, it was the last day of my probation of the gas company. And they terminated me because I couldn't go to work the next week. And this was less than a month before I was getting married. So I got married without a job and without a career goal, because the 2 things I was doing weren't going to work out. So I had to sit back a little bit and say, what is it that I truly love to do? And I love to build things. That's me. That's like the fabric that builds me, is to build things. And so I was fortunate enough to get an interview at JPL as an apprentice machinist. And I had years of machining experience on production where we would build, 20 and 30,000 of the same piece But I didn't love that. I wanted to build unique things. And I was very fortunate enough to get accepted into the apprenticeship program at JPL. In doing that, I attended, unfortunately, a minimum number of classes at Glendale College during my apprenticeship. And I was, newly married and young and trying to make the ends meet on an apprentice salary. And so we worked a lot of overtime, and we kind of grew into it that way. And so at JPL, I was so fortunate to work with very senior people from around the world. They came from Europe and all of that. And these were World War II veterans that were just brilliant mathematicians and brilliant manufacturing people, and who loved to mentor. And I loved to be the sponge. So I was very, very fortunate to be placed into that environment. And but there was a lot of people in that environment. So I had to figure out what makes me different. And what made me different is I didn't mind doing the things that nobody else wanted to do. Sometimes I was sweeping a floor, but sometimes I was figuring out a problem that nobody else wanted to tackle. And so I kind of gained a reputation for taking on stuff that was people didn't want to do. And I didn't really realize how good that was for me until, a few years later, when this was at the very onset of computerized numerical control machines. And some of the old timers, as we called them, just didn't want anything to do with computers. And I just happened to be the one in the right place. So I was brought into the CNC world and finished my apprenticeship, and then developed processes at JPL. Shaquille, you'll like these. Developed the processes at JPL on what JPL called in 1997 art to part, which was the very first time that NASA had built any hardware without a drawing, any flight hardware without a drawing. And that was for Mars Pathfinder. And so I was very fortunate enough to be given the responsibility to run the manufacturing processes in the main shop at JPL for the development of Mars Pathfinder. And I remember Brian McGlinchey, who's the director or the division manager, coming in with a whole bunch of these managers in tow. And I'm still fairly young, and he comes in, he says, Scott, you just have one job on this program that's more important than anything else. And I said, well, what's that? And he says, you have to tell engineering when they're done. Because engineering is a very iterative process, and it's search for the holy grail, right? The perfect design. And sometimes we let perfection become the enemy of good enough. And sometimes good enough is really what's important. And we have to make that judgment every day. And so I was put in that position and flourished there and had a ball doing it, and met some incredible people. And at the end of Mars Pathfinder, Jim Stats and myself, Jim was in charge of the mechanical engineering group at JPL. We sat down and we were having lunch, and he's like, Scott, we should kind of do our own thing. And it's like, Jim, I lived that. My dad had his own business twice, and I don't like eating macaroni and cheese for dinner 4 nights a week. And he's like, well, I think it'll work. And I said, well, look, let's see what happens. Well, NASA under Dan Golden was making a lot of changes. They had this outsourcing initiative and things they had talked about, but they never really had done it. And so we had 6 things on a list, and we made an agreement that if 3 of them actually happened, that we would go do our own thing. Well, about 1.5 years later, Jim walks into my office after there was an announcement at NASA, and he looked at me and he smiled, and I looked at him and I said, I know why you're here. And so from that point, we started Alliance Space Systems, or at least started talking about it. And Jim obviously was the engineering guy, and I was actually the hardware development guy, but we needed a project guy. And so we knew of a guy that at JPL, Rene Fredette, that he and I had played softball together, a brilliant engineer, an amazing person. And so we approached Rene, whose wife was pregnant with triplets. And he said, no way, my wife's pregnant with triplets. And then he called us back in the morning and says, I can't pass this up. So we started Alliance, and we had to cover some ethics rules because our JPL's ethics rules were a little unethical, meaning that we couldn't bid on projects because we came from JPL, even if we had nothing to do with them. So in working through those challenges, we were able to bid on some projects, which led to our robotic arm contracts. And so for those of you who don't know the history of Alliance Space Systems, ASI pretty much built all of the robotic arms from Mars Pathfinder through Mars 2020. Now, granted, we sold ASI a number of years ago, and so it became MDA and then now Maxar. Maxar built the Shah, or the little arm, for the Mars 2020 mission, and Motive, where I am now, built the big arm. So robotic arms and Mars have kind of been my bread and butter for the last, close to 30 years. And the challenges with those types of subassemblies and subsystems is that there's electronics, there's mechanisms, there's, we have hard mass requirements, we have, all of these different things. And you would think that we would be given a specification from JPL that was like, 3 phone books thick. And actually that's not the case at all. In some cases, it was like, 5 pages. It's like, here's your mass requirement, here's what it has to lift at the end, here's your interface control document, make it work. And so we were fortunate to work with brilliant people. We've had an incredibly good time. Along the way with ASI, we bought a composites company as well. And then we realized it was just a little too big for us. And Rene and Jim and I couldn't do justice to what Alliance had become anymore as managers, as owners. So we sold it to McDonald Detweiler, who's a multi-billion-dollar company. Basically, they seem to be the Canadian Space Agency. Basically, they're a private contractor, but most of their money comes out of the Canadian Space Agency. And so shortly after that, Rene went back to JPL. I didn't really like working for a billion-dollar company, so they sold off the composite side, and I went with them. And then Jim kind of retired, but we all kind of stayed in touch a lot, and still did some amazing stuff together even after that. But during that whole journey, I had to move from the hardware development side into quality, and that's a horrible jump. If you're not going into quality with your eyes open, you're in trouble. Quality is a thankless area to be in if you don't expect it. Because if you find a problem, you're horrible because you found a problem, right? And if you didn't find a problem, then it's like, well, you're not worth your salt because you didn't find anything. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. And the way I got into it is because, Rene and Jim and I couldn't hire somebody that would tell us no. And that's so important when you look at quality, is that quality person has to be able to stand his ground or her ground and say, no, this isn't right. We're missing a requirement here. It may meet the hard requirement, but doesn't meet the intent. And so you have to ask those questions. So because we couldn't hire it, I ended up backing into quality and eventually grew a love for it. Kind of a love-hate situation, but that's neither here nor there. There's great things about quality. There's challenges to it. For me, quality is not nearly as rewarding as is, cutting my hand while I'm machining a part. I still love that. That's still my first love. And where I'm at now at Motive Space Systems, motive, some of our early employees from ASI, after we sold the company, a number of years later said, you know what, we don't like this $1 billion thing either, so we want to start our own. And so a number of those folks started Motive Space Systems, and then called me to see if I would come, handle quality assurance and hardware development. So that's where I'm at now. I love it. It's a small business in space robotics. To me, is like a perfect home. We have a bunch of young engineers that are a little bit like I was back in the day, that want to be that sponge. And I just love to mentor people. So for me, that's the holy grail, is being able to mentor those folks. And at the same time, to still be able to cut chips and still be able to, troubleshoot problems and fix things that they say can't be fixed, and all those things. So from an educational background, I never went back and finished my degree. And that's never haunted me significantly from a true success or lack of success perspective. It's always haunted me personally, because I always knew that I should have gone back and done it. And maybe there was one regret that I have in life, is that I didn't. One quick short story, then I'll turn it back over to you, is I was working with USC ISI, which is University of Southern California, their robotics group, and we were developing a robot called Superbot. And at the end of this program, Dr. Wei-Min Shin, who was heading it up, put together this panel, and people were coming from all over the country to listen to this panel speak about this program. And I get the flyer for it, and I'm on the panel, and I see the other 4 people, and it's like a double PhD and in master's degrees and everything like that. And Wei-Min calls me. He says, Scott, we never really talked, but what's your educational background? I need to include it in this presentation that's going out. And it's out there. It's like, well, Wei-Min, I really don't have it. I just don't. And if you'd like for me not to speak at it, I can turn it over to Renee or Jim, and they can talk to it. And he's like, no way, you were key in developing this program. But the reason I bring that up is, it's in my mind, I had to try to convince myself what I needed to do at that presentation. And was I going to be selfish and try to convince everybody that because I didn't have the degree, I still knew what I was talking about? Or did I have to just go tell them, what we did and why it was so exciting? And I was fortunate enough that I got a little push from Renee, and he said, Scott, go do your thing. You love this stuff. And so I did, and it was great. And it was very well received. But that was one of those times where I looked back and said, gosh, I just wish I had the degree. And so for those people listening that may be thinking of trade schools, I think that's awesome. And looking at the trades, I think it's going to be around forever, especially if you're passionate about it. But don't stop there. Get the degree. Get that to go with it, because you're going to learn things in school that you're not going to learn in the workplace, just like you're going to learn in the workplace like you're not going to learn in school. So anyway, that's my 50 cents. Sorry, it went a little long, but that's my story.
No worries. We're glad to hear from all of you and have folks who've had different bumps in the road, different successes and challenges, and such different areas of expertise, and yet all collaborating on and in the same industry, right? Similar projects, similar backgrounds. So I think what we'll do is combine a couple of questions and then break it out into breakout rooms so that the students can really ask their own question. But the one that I would like to have each of you share before we do that is telling me a little bit more about your current position. And I'm going to combine that with, is there anything you wish you knew about your field or career when you were a college student? So a little more about the work you do now, and if there's anything you wish you knew when you were a college student. Maybe we can start with Yogida this time.
Sure. So currently, as I mentioned, I'm working on Mars 2020. I was avionics domain lead. for the rover that we landed. And my job there was to ensure that all the requirements were tested correctly. And we have ensured, so what avionics, just stepping back, avionics entails is the three major functions. First is the computer, the computing element, all the flight software that goes with it. Then it's the PAM, which is power array module, which is the power. You can think of it as a veins in your body, which distributes blood to everywhere. So it's like supplying power to the whole rover. And then the time and timekeeping, which is the clock. So everything works on clock. So those were the three major functions that I was responsible for ensuring that we have tested everything correctly. And after that, I moved to operations. So once you launch, you're in operations, meaning you ensure that you successfully land the rover. And then once it's landed, you are operating the rover and doing the mission, the science mission. The mission for our rover is to collect the samples, which we are going to bring back in our next mission that we are going to have, which is the Mars sample return. So in the operations, what I do is every day we collect the data back from the rover, we see what is the state of our rover, and then there's a planning that we do, like, okay, the next day, what will be the activities that the rover is going to do on the surface of the Mars? And then we write the sequences, all the commands that we have to send, and then we upload the commands. So the next day, those commands get automatically executed on the Mars, and we collect the sample back. So this is our day-to-day job on the surface of Mars. And then, so there are tons of scientists who every day evaluate various things, because we have beautiful instruments for various different purposes, like what is the climate there, what is the soil there, and all the different compositions, different science purposes that we have for. So those gets evaluated on the ground, and we support in building the sequences and achieve our science objectives. So Mars 2020, so right from verification, validation, testing, and all the way to the rover operations, that's what I do in my day-to-day job. And the most interesting and the challenging part of it is working with the diverse field, diverse nature, like as you all know that JPL has people all across the world. So there are different perspectives, the diversity that brings, and then the different ideas that come together. It's just amazing to work with those so many great brains around you. And it's just fun to work with them. So that's the most fun thing in my job that I feel about, and solving the technical challenges every single day. Challenges is what I like. So every day you have some challenges that you have to, either it's cost, it's schedule, or it can be technical. And I enjoy solving those kind of things. So that's what I do at present in my current job.
Fantastic. And then before we moved on, did you want to add anything you wish you knew about the field, or any advice for our GCC students on the recording, since after this we're going to do breakout rooms?
Sure. What I wish knew, okay, when I was graduating, we didn't have internet and all these kind of resources that we have right now. So at the time, I would say that if I would have known the importance of networking, mentoring, that would have really helped me a lot. But I would highly encourage, because of so many resources available right now, that try to meet as many people as possible, learn from them, and don't be intimidated by others. You know what you are, just go out there. Fear of failure is what stops people from doing things, because I used to always self-doubt, I'm not good enough, or all those kind of different things that everyone have their own biases that stops them from achieving certain things. So I would say that just go on. It's okay to fall, it's okay to fail, as long as you learn from your mistakes and keep moving on. So I think if those kind of things people would have, or somebody would have guided me, I would have appreciated. But yeah, so those are the things that I would say, that just keep going, believe in yourself, and never feel intimidated by others. You are good as long as you know what you're doing, and just keep putting your 100%, you will achieve your goals.
Thank you so much. Let's pass this question over to Shaquille.
Okay. So what I currently do at Takeda is I'm the head of validation. So I have 9 people in my team we're responsible for different aspects of validation for the site. And I'll get into what the validation is in a moment. But basically, like my team is responsible for facilities validation, utilities validation, cleaning validation, computerized system validation. And also we help write the regulatory submissions for the agency. It could be the FDA, it could be the European Medicine Agency, or whatever area that we want to sell our drug. So a little bit of what a validation is. So we work in, this is a FDA regulated industry. So if by the nature of that industry, you have to have a validation before you can manufacture the medicines. So before you can run the process or you can run the equipment, it has to be validated. And what validation does is really it proves that the system works as per the design. So you have your user requirements, you have your design documents, and my team would come in, look at those documents, create like a test plan. We call it a validation protocol that tests that system. And then we document the results, and then we create a summary report. And that summary report is sent as part of our submission to the agency. By the agency, I mean it could be the FDA, it could be European Medicine Agency, it could be the Russian Ministry of Health, wherever we want to license our drug. And then they look at that data and hopefully bless it, give their approval. And so that once they approve our validation package, that gives us the green light to go ahead and manufacture that and sell it to the patients. And so that's what validation is. And in terms of like what I wish I'd known in my career earlier on, I would say a couple of things. One of the things is communications. We're all in a technical field up here, or people on the line who want to come into this technical field. We tend to lose sight that in the world of work, just being good at technical, it'll take you somewhere. Yes, I agree. Don't get me wrong. It is very important, but really, once you start working, there's a lot of other things that are more important or equally as important as technical. And one of those things is communications. Communications, I wish I'd known how important it is. And not only really both the written and verbal, and the communications not only in the world of work, but also in your personal life. Communication is very important. So please, for the students out there, pay attention to how you communicate, written and verbal. Also, the second thing is managing your career. You as an individual have to actively manage your career. Nobody's going to say, okay, Shaquille, we're going to put you in this position for a few years, then we're going to put you in this position for a few years, and then so on. That you can do that. If you don't actively manage, people will manage your career, and you may not like where you end up, or you may not like what you're doing. So that's my word of advice, is to actively manage your career. Decide for yourself what areas you want to get experience in, what field that you want to get training in, and work with your manager or work with your other departments at the company and get that experience and keep on learning and moving. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And that transitions us well to Scott, who described, the changes you've made throughout your career by being a sponge. Let's keep this one to around 3 minutes so we can have 15 minutes for the breakout room. I know that's not much time, but we'll have you share this final question. We'll stop the recording and we'll let the students go into breakout rooms.
That's great. So what I do now is I wear multiple hats, but I have two major responsibilities and groups: hardware mission assurance, quality assurance, and then hardware development. And I know Shaquille right now is going, wait a second here, there's a huge conflict of interest there. and it does appear that way. It is something I have to be conscious of every day. But we have systems in place, as I'm sure Shaquille, can probably outline better than I can, that keep us all, in the right place. So I have groups of quality assurance folks, mission assurance folks, and then hardware development people. I'm actively involved in those roles as well. If I wasn't and still learning, I probably wouldn't still be working. You have to learn every day. If you stop learning, you're in the wrong spot. And if you stop learning, you have to move someplace. Because to me, that's what it's all about. As far as, so I want to kind of, really quickly, both Yogida and Shaquille talked about the communications and the people and the networking. Like I mentioned, I met Renee on the softball field at JPL in a personal thing, but Jim was all professional. And you just can't underestimate how important relationships are, and how important it is to be confident in your skin and be okay with failing. The only time failure is really wrong is if you don't learn from it. I mean, that's similar to what Yogida said a little while ago. You have to learn from it. So that's really important. And just remember, everybody puts their socks on kind of the same way, whether they're, in one end of the pharmaceutical world or the other end of aerospace, or, a truck driver, or, even a politician. They all put socks on the same way. So don't be afraid to talk to them. They're all real people at some point. What I wish I knew, in this, I just can't stress. I have 4 daughters, and I've pushed all of them as they got their degrees. You have to take business classes. Everything, all work is business. And you have to at least understand the concepts that go with it. You don't have to get an MBA. You don't have to take accounting classes, but you have to understand the basics of business. And so to me, if I were to ask myself, if I went back, what would I do different? I would take some more business classes. So I knew more about that. Whether you're going to own your own business or not, it's certainly wise to have, especially if you're going to end up in management somewhere.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop this recording now. Thank you, those of you who are watching later.